I don't run a charity for the simple-minded. Captain Marcus Thorne's words cut deeper than any fishhook, right there on the gleaming deck of his prized charter boat. He held up the new safety manual, its pages a blur of symbols I could never decipher, a smirk playing on his lips as the other crewmen looked away. The Key West sun beat down, but I felt a cold shame wash over me. That afternoon, cast out and adrift in my rusty skiff, the sea was my only solace, and that's when I saw it. Near the treacherous shoals, something was wrong. A shape that didn't belong, encrusted with a century of coral but glinting with a metallic sheen underneath. It was an impossibility, a secret the ocean had held for who knows how long. Would you have the courage to get closer? Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what I found inside changed everything. My name is Caleb Vance, but folks around the Key West Marina just call me Cal. I'm 38 years old, and for every one of those years, the sea has been my only true home. I can't tell you much about what's in a book, but I can read the sky like it's the morning paper. I can tell you when a squall is brewing just by the color of the water, and I know the mood of the tide better than I know my own. My hands are scarred from line burns and fish hooks. My skin is leathered by the sun and salt, and my little skiff, the Sea Serpent, is more rust than paint. But she's mine. In a world where I've never owned much of anything, she's my slice of freedom. That freedom, however, has always had a price, and the man who collected it, day in and day out, was Captain Marcus Thorne. Thorne owned the shiniest, fastest charter fleet in the Keys. His boats were like palaces on the water, all gleaming fiberglass and polished chrome, and he walked the docks like a king surveying his kingdom. And to him, I was just another piece of scenery, something to be ignored or, worse, used for a laugh. For years, I worked for him as a deckhand, the lowest rung on the ladder. The pay was barely enough to keep fuel in the Sea Serpent and food on my table, but it was work. It was the sea, and I endured. I endured the way he'd talk down to me in front of wealthy clients, explaining the simplest knot as if I were a child. "Now watch Cal, everyone," he'd boom, a smug grin on his face. "Even he can manage a bowline. It's all muscle memory, you see. Not much thinking required." The clients would chuckle politely, and I'd just focus on the rope in my hands, my knuckles white, my face burning with a shame so hot it felt like it could peel the skin right off. He knew my secret. He knew I couldn't read. He'd found out years ago when he'd tossed a clipboard at me with a new fuel manifest. "Sign here, Cal," he'd said. I just stood there, holding the pen, my mind a complete blank. The squiggly lines on the page might as well have been a foreign language. One of the other deckhands, a kid named Billy, quietly took it and showed me where to make my mark. Thorne saw it all. He never said anything directly, not then. He just stored it away, like a piece of ammunition he could use whenever he felt the need to feel bigger by making someone else feel small, and he used it often. He'd leave me written notes with instructions he knew I couldn't understand, then berate me for not following them. He'd point to warning labels or charts and ask me to read them aloud, just to watch me stammer and look away. Each time was a fresh cut, a new layer of humiliation laid over the old ones. I learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to just do my work and pray he'd leave me alone. The final day was no different from any other at first. The sun was a blistering white eye in the sky, the air thick with the smell of salt and diesel. We were cleaning his prized boat, the Orion, after a long charter. That's when he gathered the crew on the aft deck. He was holding a brand new manual, its cover glossy and bright. "All right, listen up," he announced, his voice carrying over the sound of the gulls. "New company policy, new safety protocols. Corporate wants everyone to read this, cover to cover, and sign off on it by tomorrow." He started passing them out. When he got to me, he paused. He held the manual just out of my reach, a cruel twinkle in his eye. The other guys, good men mostly, suddenly found the deck incredibly interesting to look at. They knew what was coming. He held it up, flipping through the pages filled with diagrams and dense text. "You know, Cal, this is important stuff. Emergency procedures, distress signals, things a man needs to be able to read to keep our clients safe." He looked directly at me, his voice dropping just enough for everyone to hear. "I don't run a charity for the simple-minded." The words hung in the hot, still air. They weren't shouted. They were delivered with the precision of a surgeon's knife, aimed right for the heart. I felt the world shrink down to just the space between us. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't say a word. I just turned, stepped off the Orion, and walked down the dock without looking back. I was adrift before I even untied my own boat. That afternoon, I took the sea serpent out. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to be away from the docks, away from the pitying or scornful eyes. I needed the familiar slap of water against the hull and the vast, empty horizon. I ended up near the old shoals, a treacherous place everyone avoids. The water there is shallow and unpredictable, littered with jagged coral heads that could tear the bottom out of a boat in a heartbeat. It was a place for lost things. As the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, I cut the engine. The silence was a relief, and that's when I saw it. At first it was just a trick of the light, a flash of something that didn't belong, a glint. Not the natural shimmer of light on water or the silver flash of a fish. This was a hard, metallic glint coming from a spot just below the surface, right in the heart of the most dangerous part of the reef. It was a place where no boat should be, where nothing man-made should be. The shape was wrong, an unnatural lump encrusted with what looked like a century of coral and marine growth, but something underneath caught the last rays of the dying sun. It was an impossibility, a secret the ocean had held for who knows how long. My heart started to pound, a different kind of pounding than the one I felt on Thorne's boat. This was fear, yes, but it was mixed with something else, a flicker of hope, a wild, dangerous curiosity. What would you have done? Would you have played it safe and headed back to shore, back to a life of being looked down on? Or would you have risked it all to see what secrets the water was hiding? Let me know in the comments if you would have the courage to get closer, and be sure to subscribe, because what I was about to find inside that impossible object would change not just my life, but the very rules of reality itself. The sun bled out across the horizon, and the water around me turned from turquoise to a deep, bruised purple. For a long time I just sat there, drifting, the engine silent, staring at that impossible glint. My mind was a storm of doubt. Go home, Cal. That's what the sensible part of me was screaming. Go home, patch up your pride, and find another job cleaning fish or swabbing decks. Forget you ever saw this. It's not for you. Things like this, secrets and treasures, they aren't for guys like me. But then Thorne's face swam into my vision. That smirk. I don't run a charity for the simple-minded. The words echoed in the quiet evening air, and a different feeling started to bubble up from deep inside me. Something hot and hard that pushed the fear aside. It was defiance. What did I have to lose? My job? I'd just lost it. My reputation? As what? The town simpleton who couldn't read? He'd already taken all of that. All I had left was this rusty skiff and the salt in my blood, and my curiosity. That he couldn't take from me. I pulled the starter cord. The old engine sputtered to life with a cough of blue smoke, breaking the silence. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have fancy equipment. All I had were the tools of my trade, a long-handled gaff hook, a coil of thick, weathered rope, and a pry bar I used for cracking open stubborn ice chests. It would have to be enough. I eased the sea serpent forward, my hand steady on the tiller. The shoals were a maze of jagged coral heads lying in wait just beneath the surface. One wrong move, and they would rip through my hull like a can opener. I could feel the bottom of the boat scraping against the reef, a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard that went right through my bones. Each scrape was a reminder that I was risking my only real possession for a fool's errand, for a glint of light. But I couldn't turn back. I was closer now, so close I could see the details. The coral wasn't just on it, it was part of it. Thick, gnarled branches of it, the kind that take a lifetime to grow, were fused to the object's surface. But in one spot, a chunk must have broken off recently, exposing a flat, unnaturally smooth surface of dark gray metal. It looked like the hull of a submarine, or something from a science fiction movie. It had no business being here. I cut the engine again and dropped my small anchor, praying it would hold. The boat rocked gently in the swell, and I was utterly alone. No other boats were out this far, this close to the dangerous reef. There was no one to call for help if things went wrong. It was just me, the dying light, and this thing. I leaned over the side, the gaff in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached down, the cold water soaking the sleeve of my shirt, and poked at it. The hook scraped against the coral with a gritty sound, but when I found the exposed metal, it made a sharp, clean tink. It was solid. Unbelievably solid. I tried to use the gaff to get some leverage, to see if I could move it, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The thing was wedged deep into the coral bed, held fast by the sea itself. Sweat was pouring down my face now, mixing with the salt water. This was crazy. I was a fool, chasing shadows. I almost gave up then. I almost pulled up my anchor and let the ocean keep its secret. But as I stared down into the darkening water, I saw it. A straight line. In nature, especially on a reef, everything is curves and jagged edges. But there, under a thick layer of growth, was a perfect man-made seam. And near it, what looked like a hinge. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a piece of a wreck. It was a box, a chest, a safe. The word hung in my mind. Electric. A safe. Here, looking like it had been here since the days of pirates, yet made of a metal I'd never seen before. It made no sense. And that's what sealed it for me. The sheer impossibility of it all. It was a puzzle, and for the first time in my life, it felt like a puzzle I might be able to solve. My inability to read words on a page didn't matter out here. This was a different kind of language, the language of leverage and weight, and the turning of the tide. I grabbed my pry bar. Leaning as far as I dared over the side of the skiff, I jammed the tip of it into the crevice where the object met the reef. I put all my weight on it. My muscles screamed, the veins in my arms standing out like ropes. For a moment, nothing happened. The bar bent under the strain. The sea serpent listed dangerously to one side, water sloshing over the gunwale. I was going to lose the bar, or worse, capsize my boat and be stranded out here. But I held on, gritting my teeth, putting every ounce of my frustration, every bit of the day's humiliation, into that one single push. And then I heard it, a deep groaning crack that seemed to come from the reef itself. The object shifted. It only moved an inch, but it was enough. Hope, fierce and bright, surged through me. I worked feverishly now, using the pry bar to break away more of the ancient coral, clearing a space where I could loop my thickest rope. The work was brutal. My hands were raw, my back ached, but I didn't feel it. All I could feel was the adrenaline, the wild possibility of it all. I managed to get the rope around a corner of the safe, pulling the knot so tight it bit into the metal. I looped the other end around the main cleat on my boat's stern. A piece of metal bolted through the fiberglass. I knew this was the biggest risk of all. The safe was clearly immense, far heavier than anything a small skiff was meant to pull. If the weight was too much, it wouldn't just be the rope that snapped. It could rip the cleat right out of the boat, leaving a gaping hole. I could sink in minutes. The rope was biting into my palms, the whole boat groaning like it was about to split in two. Every instinct, every bit of common sense I had, was screaming at me to cut the line and run. But something else, a voice I hadn't heard in years, was whispering, "What if? What if this was the answer?" It was hanging right there, a dark promise in the water. One final pull could bring it aboard, or sink me to the bottom with it. Would you have the courage to pull this? Subscribe to find out what I did next, because the choice I made in that moment would unleash a mystery that not even the ocean could contain. I took a deep breath, the salt stinging my lungs, and looked at the rope stretched taut between my little skiff and the dark mass in the water. It was humming with tension, a single, deep note that promised to either sing of victory or snap with catastrophic failure. My hands were shaking, but I wrapped them around the throttle. It was now or never. I shoved it forward. The engine screamed, a sound of pure mechanical agony. The stern of the sea serpent dipped so low that water sloshed over the transom, cold and terrifying around my ankles. The cleat holding the rope groaned, the fiberglass around it turning white with stress. I saw cracks spiderwebbing out from the bolts. She was coming apart. My boat, my home, my only real possession in this world, was being torn apart for a ghost, for a glint of light. I closed my eyes, waiting for the crack of splintering wood and the final cold rush of the sea, and then a deep, sucking thump. The tension on the rope suddenly slackened. The stern of the boat shot up, nearly throwing me overboard. I whipped around. The dark shape was no longer wedged in the reef. It was floating just below the surface, a monstrous weight tethered to my dying boat. Getting it back to shore was the longest journey of my life. The sun was gone, leaving only a sliver of moon in a star-dusted sky. The sea serpent sat dangerously low in the water, the safe acting like a sea anchor, making steering a nightmare. Every wave threatened to swamp me. The engine sputtered and coughed, burning oil and fuel at a terrifying rate. I had to navigate the channel in near total darkness, praying I wouldn't run aground or run into another boat. The thought of anyone seeing me, of anyone asking what I was towing, filled me with a primal fear. This was my secret, mine alone. By some miracle, I made it back to my little dock behind my rundown shack, the one place no one ever bothered to look. The work wasn't over. Getting the safe out of the water and into my shed was a battle of levers and fulcrums, of raw muscle and sheer desperation. It must have weighed close to 1,000 pounds. By the time I slid it onto the greasy concrete floor of my shed, dawn was breaking, and I was a wreck, my body screaming with a pain that was half exhaustion, half exhilaration. There it sat, under the single flickering light bulb of my shed. It was bigger than I'd thought, about the size of a shipping trunk. The coral was like a stone skin, but where it had broken off, the metal beneath was a dull, seamless gray. It didn't look like steel or iron. It was too light, too perfect. There were no visible locks, no keyholes, just that one perfect seam running around the middle. I spent the next 2 days trying to open it. I hammered at it. I used my biggest pry bar. I even bought a heavy-duty angle grinder. The noise was incredible. A high-pitched scream of metal that I was sure the whole marina could hear. Sparks flew, filling the small shed with a sharp metallic smell like a lightning strike. The pry bar bent. The hammer blows just bounced off with a dull thud. The grinder blades wore down to nothing, barely scratching the surface. This thing wasn't just built to last. It was built to be impossible to open. On the third day, soaked in sweat and on the verge of giving up, my grinder found a weak spot right on the seam. The metal glowed red, then white, and with a final desperate heave on the pry bar, I heard a hiss, like air escaping a vacuum. Then, a loud clank. The top half shifted. It was open. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been. And inside, I wasn't prepared. I think I was expecting documents or maybe some bars of silver. But what I saw stole the breath from my lungs. Gold. A sea of gold. It wasn't neat and tidy. It was a chaotic jumble of coins, thousands of them, of all shapes and sizes, spilling over each other. The light from the bare bulb overhead seemed to sink into the metal, giving it a warm, living glow. I reached in, my hand plunging into the pile. The coins were cool and heavy, impossibly heavy. They felt like solidified history. I pulled out a handful. Some were large and crudely stamped with a Spanish cross. Doubloons, like from the pirate stories. Others were perfect and sharp, with an eagle on one side and the face of Lady Liberty on the other. They were from different worlds, different centuries, all mixed together in this impossible box. I didn't know what I had, not really. I just knew it was a fortune. I took a few of the coins, one of each type, and drove 200 miles north to a city where no one knew my name. I found a rare coin dealer in a dusty little shop. He was an old man with glasses thick as bottle bottoms. I laid the coins on his velvet mat. He picked up the Spanish piece first, his eyes widening. He looked at the American eagle next, and he actually took his glasses off, polishing them as if he couldn't trust what he was seeing. He spent an hour looking at them, weighing them, checking them against books full of pictures and numbers. Finally, he looked up at me, his face pale. "Son," he said, his voice a whisper. "Where did you get these?" I just shrugged. He pointed at the coins. "This doubloon is from the wreck of the Atocha. It's worth a fortune. This gold eagle is a mint condition 1849, one of the rarest in existence. They don't belong in the same place. This collection is impossible." He scribbled a number on a piece of paper and pushed it across the counter. I stared at the numbers, but they were just shapes to me. "What does it say?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He looked at me, confused, then said the number out loud. $150 million. The drive back to Key West was a blur. The number echoed in my head. 150 million. It wasn't a real number. It was a joke, a dream, but it was real. The first thing I did was buy a brand new top-of-the-line outboard engine for the Sea Serpent. I paid in cash with a stack of $100 bills I got from selling just one of the smaller coins. The mechanic's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Then the whispers started. When I took the Sea Serpent out, she didn't cough and sputter. She flew across the water, leaving a clean white wake. A week later, I drove a new truck onto the marina lot. That's when I saw him. Marcus Thorne. He was standing by his gleaming Orion, talking to some wealthy clients. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw my truck. He saw me get out. His eyes narrowed, full of suspicion and disbelief. He walked over, his usual swagger gone, replaced by something tight and angry. "Where'd a guy like you get the money for that, Cal?" he demanded, his voice low and menacing. For the first time, I didn't look away. I didn't feel that old, familiar shame. I just looked him right in the eye. I didn't have to say a word. He saw it in my face. The power had shifted. His world of words and contracts and manuals meant nothing anymore. I had something older, something heavier, gold. His face went from red to white. He knew he'd lost, and he didn't even know what game we were playing. I had the money. I had the freedom. But I also had a mystery that was eating me alive. A titanium safe from the future, filled with gold from the past, protected by a century of coral. It made no sense. It was a treasure that defied all the rules of time and science. What would you do if you were in my place? Cash it all in and disappear, or risk everything to find out where the impossible treasure came from? Subscribe and let me know, because the answer to that question was about to get a whole lot more complicated. That number, $150 million, it changes the very air you breathe. It's not a number you can just deposit at the local bank. It's a weight, a responsibility, and a secret that burned a hole in my pocket. I knew I couldn't just start selling off priceless historical artifacts from the back of my truck. I was a fisherman, not a criminal. So I did something I'd never done before. I found the biggest, most expensive-looking law firm in Miami, and I walked in, wearing my cleanest shirt, with 3 of the gold coins in a cloth bag. I didn't know the right words, so I just told the truth. I told them I'd found something, that it was valuable, and that I needed help. I expected them to laugh me out of the office. Instead, they saw the coins, and their whole world went quiet. What followed was a blur of men in tailored suits, of secure vaults and non-disclosure agreements that they had to read aloud to me, line by painful line. They brought in experts from London, Geneva, people who spoke in hushed tones about metallurgical impossibilities and historical paradoxes. They confirmed everything the old coin dealer had said, and more. The safe itself was the biggest mystery. They took a core sample. The metal was a titanium alloy, but with a crystalline structure no one had ever seen before. It was stronger, lighter, and more resistant to corrosion than anything on Earth. One expert said it was like finding a smartphone in a pharaoh's tomb. It simply couldn't exist. The coins were auctioned off discreetly, through a private syndicate that caters to billionaires who want things no one else can have. The money didn't come in a single check. It flowed into a series of trusts and accounts. A river of gold turned into digital numbers that I still couldn't read, but I finally understood. The first thing I bought wasn't a mansion or a sports car. I bought the marina. The whole thing. The docks, the fuel station, the repair yard, and every single charter boat in Thorne's fleet. The deal was brokered through my lawyers. Thorne never even knew who the buyer was until the final papers were signed. I remember that day. I walked down the main dock not as a deckhand but as the owner. He was there yelling at some poor kid for leaving a smudge on the chrome of the Orion. He saw me coming and his face twisted into that familiar arrogant sneer. "What do you want, Cal?" he spat. "Looking for a handout? I told you I don't run a—" He stopped. One of my lawyers, a man who probably paid more in taxes than Thorne made in a year, stepped up beside me and handed him a letter. Thorne read it. His face went from tan to red to a sickly pale white. His hands started to shake. He looked from the paper to the Orion, then to me. And in his eyes I saw the exact moment his world crumbled. He wasn't looking at the simple-minded deckhand anymore. He was looking at the man who owned his boat, his business, his entire life. He was looking at an impossibility, a riddle he could never solve. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just stood there and let him see it. The power hadn't just shifted, it had been reversed like a tidal wave. He used to walk those docks like he owned them. Well, now I did. The next day, his personal belongings were in a box on the pier, and the keys to the Orion were in my hand. Life is different now. The people who used to look through me now look at me. They know my name. They offer me the best table at the restaurant. They call me Mr. Vance. It's funny, the respect I'd worked my whole life for, the respect I thought I could never earn because of the secret in my head, was just for sale. And I had bought it all. I paid off the mortgages of some of the old-timers, the good men who had always shown me a quiet kindness. I set up a fund for their kids to go to college so they'd never have to feel the shame I did. I even started taking lessons, sitting with a patient old woman who was teaching me, letter by letter, how to read. The words are still a puzzle, but for the first time, they don't feel like a locked door. But even now, with all of this, the money, the respect, the mystery keeps me up at night. I sit on the deck of my new boat, a vessel that makes the Orion look like a dinghy, and I stare out at the water, at the spot where the shoals hide their secrets. I think about that safe, a futuristic box covered in 100 years of coral filled with gold from 400 years of history. Where did it come from? Was it a time traveler's lost treasure chest? A piece of a technology from a world beyond our own? Or was it just a miracle? A cosmic mistake that put an impossible object in the path of the one man in the world who had nothing left to lose? I have the freedom. I have the fortune. But I don't have the answer. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some treasures are meant to be found, not understood. What do you think? Do you believe a turnaround like this is even possible? I lived it, and some days I still have trouble believing it myself. I want to hear your theories. Tell me in the comments where you think the safe came from. Was it aliens, time travel, or something else entirely? Share your idea, because I've heard them all and I'm still searching for one that makes sense. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the ocean is deep, and I have a feeling it hasn't given up all its secrets just yet. And let me know where you're watching from. It's a big world out there, and it feels good to finally be a part of it.